Grüß Gott, I am Sister Martina, and today we're going to talk about Pope Benedict XV. Perhaps the most unknown pope of this last popes that we have had. Benedict XV, Giacomo della Chiesa, was also an Italian from an aristocratic family, but he was not personally a man of a very imposing personality. He was very shy. We see that even in photographs. And he was not a charismatic person. And perhaps because of this, a little like Pope Benedict XVI also, we don't remember his figure as a very strong man. His pontificate was short from 1914 until 1922, and it was almost entirely marked by the First World War, the Great War, as it was named afterwards. And of course, all his efforts were his practical efforts in the sense of humanitarian help, together with the Red Cross and other institutions. The church did much for this, of course, immensely, even more than nuns, perhaps, for the children and people who were lost and so on. But he has a very, very deep and important, again, something that we sometimes take as obvious, take for granted, and it's not, we should not take it for granted, message, philosophical, theological message, and that is that peace is something that we must build. Peace is something that we must learn. We must make efforts and constant efforts, daily efforts, in order to achieve peace. Not only in the international relation between countries, but in our families, in our life, in our work. He says the words of Jesus in the gospel about peace: forgive your enemy, give the other face to those who are hating you, and the words in the Sermon of the Mountain. He says we tend to see these words as something very nice, even a bit naive, not very realistic, or Jesus is not talking for the word of today, he's talking for his times. And the Pope says, no, this is exactly the opposite. First of all, Jesus is the Son of God, so no word of him is ever unrealistic or naive. He knows exactly what he's saying, of course. And second, if he's saying these words, it's because they are not only important, they are essential. We should listen to them. And he says, the Pope, exactly these things that are deep Christian values and values of all people of goodwill in the world: to forgive, to look for reconciliation, to have patience, to somehow be open to suffer a little bit, to give of yourself in order to achieve peace. We should never be blind, of course not. And in the sense that we are defending ourselves against violence, we should sometimes even be violent in order to defend ourselves. But we should always be patient and good, always want what is good, never revengeful and so on. He says these words of Jesus are exactly essential for life in society, not only for life in my family, with my people, with the ones I love, but also for international life. There is no way, says the Pope, that we can achieve peace in the world if we as people and as countries, cultures, societies are not open to have patience, to forgive, to have solidarity, to think of the others, and so on. In this sense, he says there is no possibility of peace in the world if we don't have these moral values. And this is perhaps the deepness of his message. Peace is not something that comes from outside into us. Peace is not something that comes from the politics, that from the governments, or from somehow a piece of papers or laws. Peace is something, like Jesus says, that comes from inside us, from our soul, from our heart. When we have deeply inside us these values of peace, then these things, they reflect outside. Yes, they build societies. Yes, they influence governments, and yes, they build Christian peace. We see that because in our Western society we live since World War II very long period of peace without wars, at least in Western Europe and most of the Americas. And this was made by men after the war that tried exactly to build a new peace in the world. And it was very and deeply Christian. The beginnings of the European Union, the beginnings of the United Nations, the new relations between countries, the forgiveness and help for Germany after the war, all of these things were deeply solidary, were deeply Christian, even somehow the Marshall Plan. Yes, there was also political and economical senses, of course, but around it all, there was also this openness to help, to forgive, to somehow go ahead. And the Pope says then, when the First World War I finished, it was the first time that the Church was not invited to an European peace conference. The conference of that produced the Versailles Treaty was a conference marked by vengeance, by hate, by rancor, by the national pride, by nationalism. We know that. And the Pope says the Treaty of Versailles is actually the first page in the history of a new war, which will be much worse than this one, because of course technology will just grow. And if we go on thinking of national money and political interests above humanitarian values, above human and of course deeply human means values that come from God, then we will have one war after the other. And this is exactly what happened. I mean, the Treaty of Versailles produced so much hate and bitterness and poverty that Nazism grew in Germany, was able to grow, because of course it would exist, but it wouldn't be able to grow and to be so powerful if people were not so bitter and so poor. So let's remember this message of the Pope, that we as human persons, individuals, must build peace every day. And peace comes from within, comes from our heart. It's only when we have peace with ourselves, with each other, with our families, that we can form and live in a society of peace. And it's only when we have societies and countries which live in peace that we can have international peace. We do see this every day. I mean, the peaceful countries are countries that are always not blind, defend themselves, of course, but they are open to goodness, to patience, to tolerance, to living together, to accepting, to learning, not to humbleness, not to being proud. On the other hand, we are always falling, of course, in sins against peace, in the sense that we are always a little bit selfish and proud. So let's finish with the sense, this word of the Pope, where peace is, it's because there is virtue there. Peace is born of virtue. And war or violence or lack of peace is always born of our sins. When we find a situation without peace, we can immediately look for the sins. There are sins there. And a peaceful situation, real peace, true peace, is always born of true virtue, of true love, of love of truth, of love of God in the end, because God is truth and love and forgiveness. So let's ask Pope Benedict XV to bless us and help us to go on to live in true peace in this complicated and sometimes very violent and bitter world of ours. Until next meeting, bye-bye.